For 9 months, the mystery of who killed Russell Douglas and why weighed on his family. Then, as it often does in this story, a ringing phone brought momentous news.
I got the call from the prosecutor who said, "I'm telling you first," that they thought they knew who it was.
Jim Huden's name meant nothing to Russell's family, but the name of Huden's girlfriend, Peggy Thomas, did.
Peggy Thomas is the owner of the home that Russell and Brenna rented, that they had had a verbal agreement that they were going to buy if they could just come up with the capital.
Given that Brenna was the named beneficiary on Russell's life insurance policies, Russell's family wondered if his death was in some way part of a real estate deal.
I guess some of our family members kept thinking, did Peggy maybe do this or set this all up because she thought that if Brenna got insurance money, she would buy the house and Peggy would then have that instant cash.
Peggy Thomas appeared to be the only link between Jim Huden and Russell Douglas. And it wasn't just a circumstantial connection either. On page 14 of the Murder Weapons Owner's Manual, investigators had found a fingerprint belonging to Peggy Thomas. Troubling, but what concerned Russell Douglas's brother and sister most was the fact that Brenna didn't appear to be the least bit upset about the prospect of her friend Peggy being involved in her husband's murder.
You worked with her, and you're not saying a peep. You know, if it was your friend, something, either disbelief or, I can't believe my friend did this, I want to make sure that they, you know,
Let's go after her, let's get her,
you know, like.
You know.
And I said, you know, when you were really mad at Russ, did you ever say to Peggy while you guys were working together that Russ had some insurance money and that he'd be better to you dead than alive? And she said, well, I might have. And at that point, I just kind of looked at her and I thought, man, did this not give somebody a motive somewhere along the line?
Was this a case of angry words having unintended consequences? Or, as some suspected, had Brenna actively recruited Russell's killers? The family couldn't know for sure, but that question now complicated their relationships with Brenna and the grandchildren.
And we've tried to be as supportive as we could, especially for the kids. But I know she listens in on all their conversations. So it's a very controlled conversation.
But when it comes to awkward telephone conversations, none could have been more strained than the ones that took place between Jim Huden's lover and Jim Huden's wife after he fled to Mexico. You call her first, or she call you?
No, she called me.
And what does she want to talk about?
Well, she wanted to know what, you know, how much the cops had been bugging me and what they knew and if I had heard from Jim or anything like that.
And you what, told her?
I told her, you know, what the cops had said, but I didn't tell her anything about Jim.
Why just not hang up the phone?
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, this isn't even Jim. This is Jim's mistress.
Yeah, I know. I'm an idiot.
But that's not all. Jean says that she was able to stay in contact with Jim while he was in Mexico, and that Jim asked her to fly out to Vegas to meet with Peggy face to face and keep her in the loop.
We did have Jim in common. I never told her where he was. I did tell her that I knew, you know, he was okay. It was just very weird. I mean, we went out and had drinks and saw a band, and I really found it hard to hate her as much as I wanted to.
As months passed and Jim Huden's trail grew colder, the lives of the women who had loved him took drastically divergent paths. While Jean grew steadily poorer, supporting Jim, the ever-resourceful Peggy, now a limo driver in Vegas, hit the jackpot. In 2007, one of her fares turned out to be this man, Mark Allen, a New Mexico horse breeder and heir to an oil fortune.
The limo people asked me, do you want some guy or the ex-Mrs. Washington? I went, I'll take the ex-Mrs. Washington.
5 months after meeting Peggy Thomas, Allen says he asked her to marry him.
The biggest mistake I ever made in my life.
Within months of moving to his New Mexico ranch, Alan says Peggy was nosing her way into his horse business, pressing him to fire longtime employees and hire friends of hers.
You know, she wanted her people to do the accounting and stuff.
When he refused, Alan says, the man magnet turned into a man-eater.
She'd get on me, and it was like a day, you know, it was like a man getting on you. She's a pretty good-sized woman. I looked in her eyes, and I mean, she's evil. She is evil.
But if Peggy Thomas married well, she divorced even better. Alan says he gave her money and an 80-foot houseboat just to go away.
The divorce took way longer than the marriage did.
Looking back, Mark Allen says he should have known better. He says a few days before their wedding, Peggy let him in on a little secret.
She said that she was accused of being involved in a murder and that her ex-boyfriend had killed the guy. She said, but I didn't have nothing to do with it. And I said, well, did you take a lie detector? She said, no, my lawyer told me not to. And I went, if you're innocent, why wouldn't you take a lie detector? And she never gave me a good answer.
It should be noted that although Mark Allen says his brief marriage to Peggy Thomas cost him dearly, she did give him at least one chuckle.
Mind That Bird has won the Kentucky Derby.
In 2009, after one of his horses, Mind That Bird, won the Kentucky Derby, Allen says he saw Peggy quoted in the press.
Well, she said she was down here training horses and breeding horses. Peggy can't even step up on a horse.
Coming up, whatever happened to Jim, the fugitive from justice, and his wife Jean?
I was getting ready to leave and not be able to come back to this country for the rest of my life.
Torn between joining Jim on the lam and turning him in, which will she choose? When Dateline continues.